Speaker.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the honourable.
Mr. Speaker, there are lots of areas of policy which show that Nationals are increasingly out of touch with the values of New Zealanders. And I think that Nationals' now failed attempts to undermine the fundamental principles of Part 2 of the RMA is another of them. National has once again been on the side of a small minority who would have personally profited by doing what they wanted to do at the expense of decent environmental baselines, with disregard to what are appropriate environmental safeguards at the cost of other New Zealanders who would bear those economic consequences. Stir, at a time when New Zealand has declining fresh water quality, National's answer was, for years, to lower the environmental tests in Part 2 of the RMA. They've been pushed off that. For 10 years, they've said that New Zealand's economic performance has been substantially, not just in a little way, but substantially undermined by the fundamental principles of the RMA that they've wanted to change. Yet they failed to convince New Zealanders that that was right. And after 7 years of their excuses, sir, they have been forced to conclude, because the weight of public opinion and parliamentary opinion has been against them, they've been forced to concede that that was never true. The RMA has not been the substantial cause of New Zealand's economic performance in the last 7 years. The fact that New Zealand, on a per-person basis, the size of the New Zealand economy is shrinking, is not the fault of the RMA. Economic negative growth per capita has not been caused by the RMA. It's been caused by National's lacklustre economic performance. The RMA has been used as a whipping boy by National and ACT for years. At the time of the last election, I said if we were elected, we would give Remuera and the Epsom electorate an RMA-free zone. We'd give them a carve-out of the provisions of the RMA. Watch them come to us when we put all the prisons, all the tanneries, all the multi-storey buildings between the residents of the ACT electorate and their super yachts in the harbour, and see them complain and call for the restoration of the RMA. Nowhere is their rhetoric made more clear than in respect of housing. Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis in Auckland is severe. Not enough homes are being built. The demand side factors and the supply side factors are complex, and they do include land supply, as the Labour Party has long said. But land supply alone will not fix the housing problems in Auckland, and blaming the RMA unduly for the problems there is wrong. Mr. Speaker, it's not just Labour that's saying this. It's actually the fact that they haven't been able to get a parliamentary majority. And I want to thank every member of this parliament who has stopped the National Party gutting the RMA. I want to thank the Maori Party. The two recent things that the Maori Party have managed to knock out of this bill are the over-interpretation of property rights, which was proposed and the Maori Party managed to knock out. The other ridiculous thing that was until recently still being proposed was private consenting authorities, notwithstanding the absolute debacle of Nationals pushing upon the country private building consent authorities, which was one of the causes of the leaky building crisis and the injustices of people who couldn't get a remedy after those building consent authorities that were private went bung and disappeared. They were going to do the same thing in respect of resource consenting. The Maori Party's advocacy got rid of that. Thank you to the Maori Party. Peter Dunn has been very principled in all of this. He knows the importance of Part 2 of the Act. He was one of those who were in Parliament when the RMA was introduced, and I want to pay credit to him. The Greens and New Zealand First have also been opposing these changes. The truth of this is that on a voting basis, National Party have got 61 votes against them in a House of 120. 32 votes of those are Labour. 14 of them are the Greens, 12 of them are New Zealand First, 2 of them are the Maori Party and 1 is United Future. This Parliament is arrayed against the National Party, and despite them having the advantages of power and the pressure that they can bring upon parties, they have not succeeded in bringing the fatally flawed bill that they wanted to this House. Mr. Speaker, the New Zealand Herald in the weekend said this: dashed RMA reforms show New Zealand's priority. And I'm making some quotes from this. This government's longest and most ambitious legislative battle ended this week in defeat. And yet we had Nick Smith just claiming victory. This saga ended on Thursday when Environment Minister Nick Smith introduced a bill that will make very little difference to the operation of the Act. Victory, Dr. Smith. But the bill's real significance, again quoting, is that it represents a landmark victory for the environment over the economy. There is an economic place beyond, but there is an environmental baseline that ought not to be breached. I agree with that World Bank economist Herman Daly. At one level, the economy is a subset of the environment. You have to protect the environment in order to protect the long-term viability of your economy and have a nice place to live. Mr. Speaker, there are some aspects of this bill that we welcome. It's why we're voting for it. We have long called for standardisation of some provisions. I agree that a standard format for plans will make them all easier to follow, because we'll all know how they're all set out, and there's no problem with that being standard. They can have different rules even if they're set out in a standard way, and that is just sensible. I agree that some definitions ought to be standardised. We might have different rules as to what is the maximum height about ground level in different plans, but we should all be able to agree that we measure ground level in the same way. Things like that should be standard. We do need more national policy statements. You know, it's been clear for a long time that we've got a problem with affordable housing. How do you fix that? One of the ways is through a national policy statement on affordable housing. The Labor Party's been advocating that for 3 years. We have been offering to the government to cooperate with them in that regard, but they won't take up that offer. These do work. Look at what happened when we had a national policy statement on renewable energy that I had a hand in. Since then, we've had more than enough renewables consented. We've actually met society's need to bring forward more renewables. Renewables have dropped to 57%. They now are up to 80%. One of the blocks to that being achieved was that it was too hard to consent renewable electricity projects, so we made it easier through using the RMA to a national policy statement under the RMA to bring forward renewables. Mr. Speaker, there are some aspects which I will be wanting to debate very carefully at Select Committee, and I look forward to this, I hope, intelligent debate that we have across parties, because the government can't do this on their own. They actually need cross-party collaboration. I want to name some of them. Sir, some of the changes that have been made so far in the name of speed have actually had the opposite effect. The EPA has been a hopelessly expensive cause of more complexity and delay. We've even had complaints to the Regulations Review Committee because their multi-million-dollar bills to applicants, or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, have been so high that people have ended up before their Mr. Speaker, they also haven't caused speed. They've actually just created multi-track alternatives that have added complexity to the Act. I think we should look at that. The government might not be willing to change it. The EEZ part of this, you know, the government's major mistake here is they should have just applied the RMA to the EEZ area. They needed a different consent authority, but the same rules would have done. In terms of collaborative processes, I want to one final anecdote. I ran collaborative processes under the leading to the ETS for emissions pricing. I excluded the worst critics. I left out Don Elder from Solid Energy and the then head of Genesis Energy, an Australian who was rather unhelpful as well. I stacked that body. I actually got to an outcome through that stacked body that led to emissions pricing, which was a good thing for New Zealand. I actually did. I'm sorry, Dr. Smith, you don't realise, but we actually legislated for an ETS that we did so. You've negated some of it. Look, I'm not going to have that puerile debate. but I stacked that board in a collaborative process, just as any minister can stack a board going the other way. Collaborative processes without appeal rights can be abused by governments.
I'm sorry, but the member's time has expired.